Boker Tov, everybody, and Chag Sameach, Chag Purim Sameach. It is Purim morning here in Huntington, and it is a beautiful morning out there. The sun is out. The sky is blue. There might be some clouds. Here's Cantor Beth. We're glad she's with us this morning. And those of you who were with us last night, we apologize for the sound issues. Gremlins as always. And but it was a lot of fun. We had a great time. Cantor Beth and Scott led us through most of Queen's greatest hits, believe it or not. Maybe one or two were left out. One of my favorites was left out, but we didn't write the spiel. But we are here this morning, and we're going to read the story of Esther. We're going to do a lot of it in English. We're going to do a couple of chapters Be'ivrit in Hebrew, and Cantor Beth is going to take care of that for us. And yes, sir.
Hi. Were we going to have a service this morning or not? I remember you said
We're not having a service. We're doing a reading.
Oh,
Come join us.
Join us. You can join us if you want,
Okay.
and have a listen to the story of Esther.
Okay.
Purim is the happiest day on our calendar.
Thank you.
We are commanded to be happy. We're commanded to hear the Megillah read. We're commanded to have goodies. We eat Haman'S and all sorts of amazing things like that. And so, it's a fun day. The rabbis teach us that even in the end days, when the Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, we're still going to celebrate Purim. None of the other holidays are going to be celebrated, but Purim will be, because it's such a joyful holiday. And there's a beautiful drash that links the holiest day of the year to the happiest day of the year. Yom HaKippurim is the name of Yom Kippur. We usually shorten it, but its formal name, its bar mitzvah name is Yom HaKippurim, and that translates into Hebrew, out of Hebrew, as the day like Purim. Yom is day, Ha is the, and Ki is the word for like, and Purim, Yom HaKippurim. Now, those are the rabbis having fun with those words, but Yom Kippur should be a joyful day, and it should be a day like Purim. So we're going to start. We're going to read one of the latest books in the Bible. We know that it's late, or according to Richard Elliott Friedman in his book, The Disappearance of God, the further you get in, the later books mention God less and less. There are few mentions of God in some of the later books. And in the book of Esther, Cantor, how many times is God's name mentioned? She's saying zero. Right? This is one of the few times that the Cantor is silent. Shh, don't get her started. But
Doesn't last.
It doesn't last. And we have Maury here too. He's here joining us this morning. And so let's begin. I'm going to do a number of chapters in English. Then Cantor Beth is going to jump in the Hebrew and chant it with the trope that is used for Purim. And let's see, what else? I think that's about it. If you have a copy of the Book of Esther at home, you'll find it in any Bible, any Jewish Bible. And if you have a grogger, we're a cantor with a grogger. We will
Dangerous combination.
That's right. We will pause. I will pause because we will pause when we're reading, so you can stamp out Haman's name and boo him. So here we go. He's not in the first chapter. I'm sorry, it's English. It happened in the days of Achashverosh that Achashverosh, who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, King Achashverosh occupied the royal throne in the fortress Shushan. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the officials and courtiers and administration of Persia and Media, either one, the nobles and the governors of the provinces in his service. For no fewer than 180 days, they displayed the vast riches of his kingdom and the splendid glory of his majesty. At the end of this period, the king gave a banquet for 7 days in the court of the king's palace garden for all the people who lived in the fortress of Shushan, high and low alike. There were hangings of white cotton and blue wool, caught up by the cords of fine linen, and purple wool to silver rods and alabaster columns. And there were couches of gold and silver on a pavement of marble, alabaster, mother of pearl, and mosaics. The drinking ware was golden beakers, beakers of varied design, and there was royal wine in abundance as befits a king. And the rule for the drinking was no restrictions, for the king had given orders to every palace steward to comply with each man's wishes. In addition, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he ordered Mehuman. Look at this in Hebrew.
Haman. Yeah.
Mehuman. I just want to see it in the Hebrew. There we go. Mehuman, Bista, Harvona, Bigta, Va'agata, Zatar, V'charkas, Shivat, Hasarisim, right? These 7 eunuchs in attendance of King Ahasuerus to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing a royal diadem, to display her beauty to the peoples and the officials, for she was a beautiful woman. But Queen Vashti refused to come to the king's command, at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. The king was greatly incensed, and his fury burned within him. Then the king consulted the sages learned in procedure, for it was the royal practice to turn to all who were versed in law and precedent. His close advisors were Karshana, Shetar, Admata, Taroshish, Meres, Mar Sana, Mimumkhan. The 7 ministers of Persia and Media, who had access to the royal presence and occupied the first place in the kingdom. What, he asked, shall be done according to law to Queen Vashti for failing to obey the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs? Thereupon, Memucan declared that in the presence of the king and the ministers, Queen Vashti has committed an offense, not only against your majesty, but also against all the officials and against all the people in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will make all wives despise their husbands, as they reflect that King Ahasuerus himself ordered Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will cite it to all your majesty's officials, and there will be no end of scorn and provocation. If it please your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you. Let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another, who is far more worthy than she. Then will the judgment executed by your majesty resound throughout your realm, vast though it is, and all wives will treat their husbands with respect, high and low alike. The proposal was approved by the king and the ministers, and the king did as Memucan proposed. Dispatches were sent to all the provinces of the king, to every province in its own script, to every nation in its own language, that every man should wield authority in his home and speak the language of his own people. Chapter 2. Sometime afterward, when the anger of King Ahasuerus subsided, he thought of Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. The king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for your majesty. Let your majesty appoint officers in every province of your realm to assemble all the beautiful young virgins at the fortress Shushan, in the harem under the supervision of Haggai, No, it's Haggai. Maze?
Okay.
Haggai. Ugh. These names. The king's eunuch, watch guardian of the women. Let them be provided with their cosmetics, and let the maidens who please your majesty be queen instead of Vashti. The proposal pleased the king, and he acted upon it. In the fortress of Shushan lived a Jew by the name of Mordechai, son of Yair, of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been exiled from Jerusalem in the group that was carried into exile along with King Yechoniah Melech Yehuda, king of Judah, who has been driven into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. He was foster father of Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was shapely and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordechai adopted her as his own daughter. When the king's order and edict was proclaimed, and many girls were assembled in the fortress of Shushan under the supervision of Haggai, Esther too was taken to the king's palace under the supervision of Haggai, guardian of the women. The girl pleased him and won his favor, and he hastened to furnish her with her cosmetics and rations, as well as with the 7 maids who were her due from the king's palace. And he treated her and her maids with special kindness in the harem. Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordechai told her not to reveal it. But every single day, Mordechai would walk about in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was faring and what was happening to her. When each girl's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus at the end of the 12 months treatment prescribed for women, for that was the period spent on beautifying them, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfume and women's cosmetics. And it was after that that the girl would go to the king. Whatever she asked for would be given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. She would go in the evening and leave in the morning. For a second harem in charge of, where's his name? Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch, guardian of the concubines. She would not go out again to the king unless the king wanted her, when she would be summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordechai, who had adopted her as his own daughter, to go to the king, she did not ask for anything but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, guardian of the women, advised. Yet Esther won the admiration of all who saw her. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in the royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won his grace and favor more than all the other virgins. He set a royal diadem on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. The king gave a great banquet for all his officials and courtiers, the banquet of Esther. He proclaimed a remission of taxes for the provinces and distributed gifts as befits a king. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordechai sat in the palace gate. But Esther still did not reveal her kindred or her people, as Mordechai had instructed her. For Esther obeyed Mordechai's bidding, as she had done since she was under his tutelage. At that time, when Mordechai was sitting at the palace gate, Bigtan and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus. Mordechai learned of it and told it to Queen Esther, and Esther reported it to the king in Mordechai's name. The matter was investigated and found to be so, and the 2 were impaled on stakes. This was recorded in the book of Annals at the instance of the king.
Sometime afterwards, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite. He advanced him and seated him higher than any of his fellow officials. All the king's courtiers in the palace gate knelt and bowed low to Haman, for such was the king's order concerning him. But Mordechai would not kneel or bow low. Then the king's courtiers who were in the palace gate said to Mordechai, "Why do you disobey the king's orders?" When they spoke to him day after day and he would not listen to them, they told Haman, in order to see whether Mordechai's resolve would prevail, for he had explained to them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordechai would not kneel or bow low to him, Haman was filled with rage. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordechai alone. Having been told who Mordechai's people were, Haman plotted to do away with all the Jews, Mordechai's people, throughout the kingdom of Ahasuerus. In the first month, that is, the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of the king Ahasuerus, Pur, which means the lot, was cast before Haman concerning every day and every month, until it fell on the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the other peoples in all the provinces of your realm, whose laws are different from those of any other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. And it is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them. If it please your majesty, let an edict be drawn for their destruction, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the stewards for deposit in the royal treasury." Thereupon, the king removed his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the foe of the Jews. And the king said, "The money and the people are yours to do with as you see fit." On the 30th day of the first month, the king's scribes were summoned, and a decree was issued, as Haman did, to the king's satraps, to the governors of every province, and to the officials of every people, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language. The orders were issued in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet. Accordingly, written instructions were dispatched by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, massacre, and exterminate all the Jews, young and old, children and women, on a single day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is, the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. The text of the document was to the effect that a law should be proclaimed in every single province. It was to be publicly displayed to all the peoples so that they might be ready for that day. The couriers went out post-haste on the royal mission, and the decree was proclaimed in the fortress Shushan. The king and Haman sat down to feast, but the city of Shushan was dumbfounded.
Would you like to read?
Okay.
It's just the top part.
It's just the top parts of it. So you'll see them on the tops of the pages. Right? So it's all just the top parts.
Okay. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. He went through the city, crying out loudly and bitterly, until he came in front of the palace gate, for one could not enter the palace gate wearing sackcloth. Also, in every province that the king's command and decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and everybody lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maidens and eunuchs came and informed her, the queen was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordecai to wear, so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he refused. Thereupon Esther summoned Hatak, one of the eunuchs whom the king had appointed to serve her, and sent him to Mordecai to learn the why and wherefore of it all. Hatak went out to Mordecai in the city square in front of the palace gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and all about the money that Haman had offered to the royal treasury for destruction of the Jews. He also gave him the written text of the law that had been proclaimed in Shushan for their destruction. He bade him show it to Esther and inform her and charge her to go to the king and to appeal to him and to plead with him for her people. When Hatach came and delivered Mordecai's message to Esther, and Esther told Hatach to take back to Mordecai the following reply: all the king's couriers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence, the inner court, without having been summoned, there is but one law for him, that he be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter to him may he live. Now I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days. When Mordecai was told that Esther had said, Mordecai had this message delivered to Esther: do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis. Then Esther sent back this answer to Mordecai: go, assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast in my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law, and if I am to perish, I shall perish. So Mordecai went about the city and did just as Esther commanded him.
Okay, that's good. That's chapter 4.
Oh,
Yep. Good job. Well done. Yes, it's a compelling story.
yes.
Okay, now Cantor Beth is going to take over, and she's going to read chapter 5 for us in the traditional Purim trope. Nusach trope. Trope.
Vayihi bayom hashlishi ותלבש אסתר מלכות ותעמוד בחצר בית המלך הפנימית נוכח בית המלך והמלך יושב על כיסא מלכותו בבית המלכות נוכח פתח הבית ויהי לראות המלך את אסתר המלכה עומדת בחצר נשאה חן בעיניו ויושיט המלך לאסתר את שרביט הזהב אשר בידו ותקרב אסתר ותיגע בראש השרביט ויאמר לה המלך מה לך אסתר המלכה ומה בקשתך עד חצי המלכות ויינתן לך ותאמר אסתר אם על המלך טוב יבוא המלך והמן היום על המשתה אשר עשיתי לו ויאמר המלך מהרו את המן לעשות את דבר אסתר ויבוא המלך והמן על המשתה אשר עשתה אסתר ויאמר המלך לאסתר במשתה היין מה שאלתך ויינתן לך ומה בקשתך עד חצי המלכות ותעש וטען אסתר ותאמר שאלתי ובקשתי אם מצאתי חן בעיני המלך ואם על המלך טוב לתת את שאלתי ולעשות את בקשתי יבוא המלך והמן אל המשתה אשר אעשה להם ומחר אעשה כדבר המלך ויצא המן ביום ההוא שמח וטוב לב בחירות המן את מרדכי בשער המלך ולא קם ולא זע ממנו, וימלא המן על מרדכי חמה, ויתאפק המן, ויבוא אל ביתו, וישלח, ויבוא את אוהביו ואת זרש אשתו, ויספר להם המן את כבוד עושרו ורוב בניו, ואת כל אשר גידלו המלך, ואת אשר נישאו על השרים ועבדי המלך. ויאמר המן, אף לא הביאה אסתר המלכה עם המלך אל המשתה אשר עשתה כי עם אותי, וגם למחר אני קראו לה עם המלך, וכל זה איננו שווה לי, בכל עת אשר אני רואה את מרדכי היהודי יושב בשער המלך, ותאמר לו זרש אשתו וכל אוהביו יעשו עץ גבוה 50 אמה, ובבוקר אמור למלך, ויתלו את מרדכי עליו. ובוא עם המלך אשר אל המשתה שמח, ויטב הדבר לפני המן, ויעש העץ.
Or do you want to make the grogger go?
There you go.
Oh, yeah. That night, sleep deserted the king, and he ordered the book of records, the annals, to be brought. And it was read to the king. And there it was written that Mordechai had denounced Bigtana and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, who had plotted to do away with King Ahasuerus. What honor or advancement has been conferred on Mordechai for this? The king inquired. Nothing at all has been done for him, replied the king's servants who were in attendance on him. Who is in the court? The king asked, for Haman entered the outer court of the royal palace to speak to the king about having Mordechai impaled on the stake he had prepared for him. It is Haman. Standing in the court, the king's servants answered him. Let him enter, said the king. Haman entered, and the king asked him, what should be done for a man whom the king desires to honor? Haman said to himself, whom would the king desire to honor more than me? So Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king desires to honor, let the royal garb which the king has worn be brought, and a horse, a stallion, on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal diadem has been set, and let the entire and the stallion be put in the charge of one of the king's noble courtiers, and let the man whom the king desires to honor be attired and paraded on the horse throughout the city square, while they proclaim before him, this is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor. Quick then, said the king to Haman, get the garb and the horse as you have said, and do this to Mordechai the Jew, who sits in the king's gate. Omit nothing of all you have proposed. So Haman took the garb and the horse and arrayed Mordechai and paraded him through the city square, and he proclaimed before him, this is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor. Then Mordechai returned to the king's gate, while Haman hurried home, his head covered in mourning. There Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had befallen him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish stock, You will not overcome him. You will fall before him to your ruin. While they were still speaking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurriedly brought Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman came to the feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, the king again asked Esther at the wine feast, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even to half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." Queen Esther replied, "If your majesty will do me the favor, if it pleases your majesty, let my life be granted me as my wish, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, massacred, and exterminated. Had we only been sold as bondmen and bondwomen, I would have kept silent, for the adversary is not worthy of the king's trouble." Thereupon King Ahasuerus demanded of Queen Esther, "Who is he, and who is he who dared to do this?" "The adversary and enemy," replied Esther, "is this evil Haman." And Haman cringed in terror before the king and the queen. The king, in his fury, left the wine feast for the palace garden, while Haman remained to plead with Queen Esther for his life, for he saw that the king had resolved to destroy him. When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet room, Haman was lying prostrate on the couch on which Esther reclined. "Does he mean," cried the king, "to ravish the queen in my own palace?" No sooner did these words leave the king's lips than Haman's face was covered. Then Harbonah, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "What is more, a stake is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordechai, the man whose words saved the king. Impale him on it," the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the stake which he had put up for Mordechai, and the king's fury abated. That very day, King Ahasuerus gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Mordechai presented himself to the king, for Esther had revealed how he was related to her. The king slipped off his ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordechai. And Esther put Mordechai in charge of Haman's property. Esther spoke to the king again, falling at his feet and weeping, and beseeching him to avert the evil plotted by Haman, the Agagite, against the Jews. The king extended the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther arose and stood before the king. "If it please your majesty," she said, "and if I have won your favor, and the proposal seems right to your majesty, and if I am pleasing to you, let dispatches be written countermanding those which were written by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, embodying his plot to annihilate the Jews throughout the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see the disaster which will befall my people, and how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then King Ahasuerus said to King Esther and Mordechai the Jew, I have given Haman's property to Esther, and he has been impaled on the stake for scheming against the Jews. And you may further write with regard to the Jews as you see fit. Write it in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet. For an edict that has been written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet may not be revoked. So the king's scribes were summoned at that time on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, that is, the month of Sivan, and letters were written at Mordechai's dictation to the Jews and to the satraps and governors and officials of the 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. He had them written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet. Letters were dispatched by mounted couriers, riding steeds used in the king's service, bred for the royal stud, to this effect: the king has permitted the Jews of every city to assemble and fight for their lives. If any people or province attacks them, they may destroy, massacre, and exterminate its armed forces together with the women and children, and plunder their possessions. On a single day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, the text of the document was to be issued as a law to every single province. It was to be publicly displayed to all the peoples, so that the Jews should be ready for that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, mounted on royal steeds, went out in urgent haste at the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in the fortress Shushan. Mordechai left the king's presence in royal robes of blue and white, with a magnificent crown of gold and a mantle of fine linen and purple wool. The city of Shushan rang with joyous cries. The Jews enjoyed light and gladness, happiness and honor. And in every province and in every city, when the king's command and decree arrived, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many of the people of the land professed to be Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. And so on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, when the king's command and decree were to be executed, the very day on which the enemies of the Jews had expected to get them in their power, the opposite happened, and the Jews got their enemies in their power. Throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the Jews mustered in their cities to attack those who sought their hurt, and no one could withstand them, for the fear of them had fallen upon all the peoples. Indeed, all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's stewards showed deference to the Jews, because the fear of Mordechai had fallen upon them. For Mordechai was now powerful in the royal palace, and his fame was spreading through all the provinces. The man Mordechai was growing ever more powerful. So the Jews struck at their enemies with the sword, slaying and destroying. They wreaked their will upon their enemies. Do you want to do the names?
Sure.
Oh, good.
ובשושן הבירה הרגו היהודים ואבד 500 איש ואת פרשנתה ואת צפון ואת אספתה ואת הורתה ואת עדליה ואת ארידתה ואת פרמשתה ואת אריסי ואת ארידי ואת ויזתה.
And the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the foe of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the spoil. When the number of those slain in the fortress Shushan was reported on the same day to the king said to Queen Esther, in the fortress Shushan, all alone, the Jews have killed a total of 500 men, as well as the 10 sons of Haman. What then must they have done in the provinces of the realm? What is your wish now? It shall be granted to you. And what else is your request? It shall be fulfilled. If it please your majesty, Esther replied, let the Jews of Shushan be permitted to act tomorrow, also as they did today, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on the stake. The king ordered that this should be done, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan. Haman's 10 sons were impaled, and the Jews in Shushan mustered again on the 14th day of Adar and slew 300 men in Shushan, but they did not lay hands on the spoil. The rest of the Jews, those in the king's provinces, likewise mustered and fought for their lives. They disposed of their enemies, killing 75,000 of their foes, but they did not lay hands on the spoil. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and they rested on the 14th day and made it a day of feasting and merrymaking. But the Jews in Shushan mustered on both the 13th and the 14th days, and so rested on the 15th, and made it a day of feasting and merrymaking. This is why village Jews who lived in unwalled towns observe the 14th day of the month of Adar and make it a day of merrymaking and fasting, and as a holiday and an occasion for sending gifts to each other. Mordechai recorded these events, and he sent dispatches to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, near and far, charging them to observe the 14th and 15th days of Adar every year, the same days on which the Jews enjoyed relief from their foes, and the same month which has been transformed for them from one of grief and mourning to one of festive joy. They were to observe them as days of feasting and merrymaking, and as an occasion for sending gifts to one another and presents to the poor. The Jews accordingly assumed as an obligation that which they had begun to practice when which Mordechai prescribed for them. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the foe of all the Jews, had plotted to destroy the Jews and had cast Pur, that is, the lot, with intent to crush and exterminate them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded, with all the promulgation of this decree, let the evil plot which he devised against the Jews recoil on his own head. So they impaled him and his sons on the stake. For that reason, these days were named Purim, after Pur. In view, then, of all the instructions in the said letter and what they had experienced in that matter and what had befallen them, the Jews undertook and irrevocably obligated themselves and their descendants and all who might join them to observe these 2 days in the manner prescribed and at the proper time each year. Consequently, these days are recalled and observed in every generation by every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim shall never cease among the Jews, and the memory of them shall never perish among their descendants. Then Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, wrote a second letter of Purim for the purpose of confirming with full authority the aforementioned one of Mordechai the Jew. Dispatches were sent to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the realms of Ahasuerus with an ordinance of equity and honesty. These days of Purim shall be observed at their proper time, as Mordechai the Jew, and now Queen Esther, has obligated them to do, just as they have assumed for themselves and their descendants the obligation of the fasts with their lamentations. And Esther's ordinance validating these observances of Purim were recorded in a scroll.
Vayasem Hamelech Achashverosh mas al haaretz v'iyeh hayam v'chol ma'aseh tokpo ugvurato ufarashat gedolot Mordechai asher gidluhu Hamelech Elohim Ketuvim al Sefer Divrei Hayamim Lemache Madai Ufaras Ki Mordechai HaYehudi Mishne LaMelech Achashverosh V'gadol LaYehudim V'ratzui LeRov Echav Doresh Tov LeAmo V'dober shalom lechol zaro.
And King Ahasuerus imposed tribute on the mainland and the islands, all his mighty and powerful acts, and a full account of the greatness to which the king advanced Mordechai. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Persia, of Media and Persia? For Mordechai, the Jew, ranked next to King Ahasuerus and was highly regarded by the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brethren. He sought the good of all his people and interceded for the welfare of all his kindred. And that, my friends, is the story of Purim and Esther, the Megillah Esther, found in our Bible in the writings. And again, a late book, no mention of God, but there were miraculous deeds going on. Maybe God was acting behind the scenes. I want to thank Maury for being here, manning the grogger and reading, Cantor Beth and her lovely voice. And we will see you all Friday night, special Shabbat. We're going to be lots of singing. Cantor Beth is going to do lots of singing. Not so much me. Not so much me. But Friday night, that's tomorrow night, 6 o'clock. You don't want to miss it. And then back on Shabbat morning for Shabbat morning services, Cantor Beth and the voice will be back. So join us. We're open. We're waiting for you. Hope to see you. Chag Sameach, Chag Purim Sameach. Have a wonderful day. Be safe out there, and we'll see you soon.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Yeah.